Have you ever felt the temperature of your own blood drop 30 degrees in a single second? It's a physical sensation, a literal freezing of the marrow in your bones that happens right when the world decides to remind you exactly who they think you are. I'm sitting here now, looking at the city lights through my office window, rubbing my wrists where the phantom weight of cold, jagged steel still seems to linger. It's a funny thing about success in this country. You can build a kingdom. You can wear a suit that costs more than some people make in a year, and you can carry the weight of a multi-million-dollar merger on your shoulders. But at the end of the day, to some people, you're just a target in expensive packaging. I need to know if I'm alone in this. Truly, before I go any further, I want you to look at your own life and tell me, have you ever reached the absolute peak of your mountain, standing there with the world at your feet, only to realize you're actually standing on a trap door? Have you ever felt that the American dream was just a lease you had to renew every single morning with a smile and a yes? Sir, drop a comment right now and let me know where you're watching from. I need to feel the community tonight. I need to know that the air I'm breathing isn't just a vacuum. And if this story hits home, if you've ever felt that invisible ceiling pressing down on your head, hit that subscribe button. We have to keep these truths alive because if we don't tell them, they'll bury them under the rug of progress. That morning started like any other day in the life of a man who has made it. My alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I like the silence of the city at that hour. It's the only time I feel like I don't have to perform. I spent an hour in my home gym. The rhythmic clanking of the iron plates, the only soundtrack to my thoughts. I looked at myself in the mirror, 50 years old, silver starting to pepper my beard, skin the color of deep mahogany. I saw a CEO. I saw a father. I saw a man who had spent 30 years climbing a ladder that was missing half its rungs. I dressed with the precision of a soldier, preparing for battle. A bespoke charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt with cufflinks that were a gift from my board of directors after our last successful IPO, and a Patek Philippe on my left wrist that ticked with a quiet, arrogant confidence. I picked up my briefcase, a $5 bill, 000 piece of handcrafted Italian leather that held the future of my company. Inside were the final contracts for a merger that would solidify my legacy. I felt invincible. I felt like the golden boy of the industry. The air outside was crisp as I stepped into the black car waiting at my curb. My driver, a man I'd known for years, gave me a nod. "Big day, sir," he said. I smiled back, feeling the weight of the moment. "The biggest," I replied. We were headed to the train station. I had a 7:30 a.m. express to the airport hub, a transition I'd made 1,000 times. I preferred the train for this leg. It gave me 20 minutes of uninterrupted focus to go over the numbers one last time before the flight. When we pulled up to the station, the sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the neoclassical pillars of the terminal. I stepped out, adjusted my tie, and felt the familiar hum of the city. People were rushing, a sea of suits and trench coats, all of us cog wheels in the great American machine. I walked with a purpose, my stride long and confident. I wasn't just walking into a station, I was walking toward the culmination of my life's work. But as I stepped through those massive brass doors, the atmosphere shifted. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and the air pressure seems to change. That's what it's like for us. We have a sixth sense for the gaze. It's a specific kind of look, not of curiosity, but of suspicion. It's the look that asks, "Why are you here?" before you've even opened your mouth. I headed toward the first-class ticket counter. Even though I had my digital pass on my phone, I liked having the physical ticket as a backup. There was a young woman behind the glass, her eyes darting across the lobby. When I approached, she didn't offer the practice good morning she'd given the man in front of me. Instead, her posture stiffened. "I'm here for the 7:30 express, first class," I said, my voice low and professional, the voice I use to command boardrooms. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at my hands. Specifically, she looked at the briefcase resting on the counter. "ID," she snapped. "Not may I see your ID? Please." But a command. I pulled out my driver's license. She took it, held it up to the light, and then looked back at me. Her eyes traveled from my face to the photo, then down to my suit, then back to the briefcase. There was a hesitation there that was longer than necessary. It was a microaggression I'd learned to swallow like glass over the years. Sharp, painful, but something you just deal with to keep moving forward. "Is there a problem?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral. Experience had taught me that any sign of frustration would be interpreted as aggression. "Just verifying," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. She handed the ID back with 2 fingers, as if she didn't want to touch it. "The scanners are being temperamental today. Security might want a second look at your luggage." I glanced over my shoulder. 2 security guards were standing near the pillars, their thumbs tucked into their belts. Their eyes locked on me. They weren't looking at the hundreds of other people flowing past. They were looking at the man in the charcoal suit with the expensive bag. I felt a prickle of heat on the back of my neck. I knew this dance. I'd danced it in high-end boutiques, where I was followed from aisle to aisle. I'd danced it in luxury car dealerships, where I was asked for a proof of funds before a test drive. But today, I didn't have time for the choreography. I had a merger. I had a legacy to secure. "Thank you," I said, taking my ticket and turning away. I could feel their eyes burning into the back of my coat. I started walking toward the platform, my heart beginning to thud against my ribs, not from fear, but from the sheer, exhausting weight of having to prove I belonged in a space I had already bought and paid for. The station was an echo chamber of footsteps and muffled announcements. As I moved deeper into the terminal toward the express gates, the crowd thinned out. The pillars seemed taller, the shadows more oppressive. I adjusted the strap of my briefcase, the leather smooth against my palm. This bag contained the blood, sweat, and tears of a decade. It held the signatures of people who believed in my vision. It was my armor. I was maybe 50 yards from the gate when I noticed the rhythm of footsteps behind me changed. It wasn't the scattered, frantic pace of commuters. It was heavy, synchronized, and deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I turned around, I was acknowledging the hunt. I kept my eyes fixed on the gate sign, the glowing numbers of the 7:30 departure feeling like a finish line. I thought about the boardroom waiting for me. I thought about my son, who I had told just that morning that he could be anything he wanted to be in this world. I thought about the lie I might have been telling him. The air in the terminal felt suddenly cold, the kind of cold that smells like ozone and old stone. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and controlled. I was a CEO. I was a leader. I was a man of status. But in the reflection of a nearby shop window, I didn't see a businessman. I saw a shadow being trailed by 2 larger, darker shadows. The gap between us was closing. I could hear the jingle of equipment, handcuffs, radios, the metallic sounds of authority. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed a handful of dry sand. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body, honed by centuries of ancestral memory, told me to run, but I knew that if I ran, the story would end in a way I couldn't come back from. I reached the threshold of the platform entrance, the ticket scanner just a few feet away. I reached out my hand. Ticket ready. My eyes focused on the light that would turn green and grant me passage into the sanctuary of the first-class carriage. I was so close. I could almost smell the coffee and the silence of the train. Just as my fingers brushed the edge of the scanner, a hand, heavy and calloused, clamped down on my right shoulder with a force that sent a jolt of electricity down my spine, jerking my entire body to a sudden, jarring halt. The world didn't stop, but it certainly felt like it did. There was no sound for a moment, just the hum of the station's electric clock ticking over and the heavy, metallic smell of the brake dust from the incoming 7:15 local. I stayed perfectly still, my hand hovering just an inch above the ticket scanner. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I knew that any sudden movement, any reflexive jerk of my shoulder, would be written in a report later as resisting. I've spent my entire life learning how to be the most non-threatening version of a 6'2" man that I can possibly be. And in that moment, that instinct took over like a cold, familiar software update. Turn around slowly, a voice rasped. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the kind of gravelly, low-frequency tone that's designed to make a man feel like a criminal before he even knows what his crime is. I turned. I did it, with the deliberate, slow-motion grace of someone who knows they are being watched by a predator. Standing there were two officers. One was older, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of a block of salt, weathered, gray, and completely devoid of empathy. The other was younger, with a buzz cut so tight it looked painful, and eyes that were darting toward my hands, then my waist, then back to my face. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Officers," I asked. I kept my voice in that low, resonant frequency I use when I'm closing a deal. It's a voice that commands respect without demanding it. It's the voice of a man who pays more in taxes than these two make in a decade. But as I looked into their eyes, I realized that my voice, my suit, and my tax bracket didn't exist to them. They were looking through the Patek Philippe and the charcoal wool. They were looking at a problem they felt they needed to solve. "The bag," the older one said, gesturing with a gloved finger toward my Italian leather briefcase. "Where'd you get it?" I felt a surge of something hot and bitter rise up from my stomach. The swallowing glass feeling I told you about. "I bought it," I said, my voice steady despite the heat. "In Florence. 3 years ago." "Why?" The younger officer stepped closer, entering my personal space in a way that was meant to provoke. "We've had reports of high-value thefts in the terminal this morning. Matching your description. A man in a suit, carrying a bag just like that. Matching my description." I let a small, tight smile touch my lips, though there was no humor in it. "You mean a black man in a suit? Because I'm fairly certain I'm the only one on this platform right now. Don't get smart with us." The older one snapped, his hand shifting down toward his belt. The threat was unspoken, but deafening. "We're doing our jobs. Open the bag." This was the moment. This was the intersection where my life as a CEO met my reality as a black man. Inside that bag were the merger documents, private contracts, intellectual property that was worth more than the station we were standing in. If I opened it here, in the middle of a crowded platform, I was violating a dozen non-disclosure agreements. But if I didn't, I was headed to a precinct in handcuffs. I looked around. The commuters were starting to notice. These were people I recognized, people from the financial district. Maybe even some of my own junior analysts or competitors. I saw the way they looked at me. It wasn't with the respect I'd spent 30 years earning. It was with a morbid, detached curiosity. To them, I was a storytime video in the making. I was a disruption to their morning coffee. I saw a young man I'd mentored last summer, a bright kid who looked up to me. He saw me being cornered like a stray dog. John Tam BLACKCEO. The shame of that, the sheer, visceral humiliation of being devalued in front of my own community, was worse than any physical blow. I am not opening this bag on a public platform, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming hard and unyielding. I have already shown my ID to the ticket counter. I am a frequent traveler, a member of the board for 3 local charities, and the CEO of a firm located 4 blocks from here. If you have a legitimate reason to detain me, do it. Otherwise, I have a train to catch. The older officer's eyes turned into cold slits. He didn't care about my charities. He didn't care about my firm. He cared about the fact that I was talking back. "You're coming with us," he said. They didn't cuff me yet. They just flanked me, 1 on each side, their shoulders brushing mine as they led me away from the first-class gate and toward a gray, unmarked door near the luggage car. The walk felt like a mile. Every step was a rhythmic reminder of my own powerlessness. I could feel the eyes of the crowd on my back, 100 tiny needles of judgment. I wondered if they were thinking I knew he didn't belong here, or if they were just glad it wasn't them. Inside the small, windowless security room, the air was stagnant and smelled of bleach and old coffee. They made me stand. They didn't offer a chair. "Empty your pockets," the younger one commanded. I did it. The iPhone 15, the slim leather wallet, the keys to a car I wasn't allowed to drive myself today. The Patek Philippe came off last, the gold heavy in my hand. I placed it on the scratched metal table like a sacrificial offering. Then came the bag. I watched as the older officer unzipped it with zero regard for the delicate leather. He began pulling out the folders. "What's this?" he asked, waving a thick stack of papers. "Confidential legal documents," I said, my jaw so tight it ached. "Documents you are not authorized to read." He ignored me, flipping through the pages. He wasn't looking for a stolen watch or a wad of cash. He was looking for a reason. He was looking for the lie. He wanted to find a drug rap, a weapon, anything that would justify the fact that he'd pulled a successful man off a platform for no reason other than his own bias. But all he found was high-level corporate strategy and a fountain pen. He sat there for a long time, staring at a page he clearly didn't understand. The silence in the room was suffocating. I stood there, my hands folded in front of me, breathing through my nose, counting the seconds. I thought about the flight I was going to miss. I thought about the merger. I thought about the thousands of employees whose futures depended on the meeting I was supposed to have. Finally, he shoved the papers back into the bag, messily, wrinkling the edges of the contracts, and zipped it shut. He didn't look at me. He looked at his partner. "Check the ID again," he muttered. The younger officer took my license over to a computer in the corner. He typed for a minute, then another. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. I saw his shoulders drop just a fraction. He turned around and nodded. He's clear," the younger one whispered. The older officer stood up. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer a sorry for the inconvenience. He just picked up my watch and my wallet and slid them across the table toward me. "Get out of here," he said, his voice dripping with a weird kind of resentment, as if I was the one who had wasted his time. "And stay off the platforms until your train is called next time." I didn't say a word. I gathered my things. my fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a rage so deep and ancient, it felt like it was part of my DNA. I walked out of that room and back onto the platform. The 7:30 express was gone. I'd missed it. I stood there in the middle of the station, the crowd flowing around me like water around a stone. I felt naked. I felt like the suit had been stripped off me, leaving me standing there in nothing but my skin. I had to get to the airport. I had to make the flight. If I missed the merger, the other side would win. They'd say I wasn't reliable. They'd say I couldn't handle the pressure. I called a private car. The ride to the airport was a blur of gray highways and rain-streaked windows. I stared out at the city, but I didn't see the skyscrapers I helped build. I saw a cage. I saw the invisible lines we aren't supposed to cross. The driver, a young man of color, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. He saw my disheveled hair, the way I was clutching the briefcase. He didn't ask questions. He just turned up the music, some smooth, soulful jazz that felt like a bandage on a wound. "You okay, boss?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a long morning. I feel you," he said. And in those 3 words, there was more understanding than I'd found in that security room or on that platform. By the time we pulled up to the airport, I had forced the rage down into a small, cold ball in the center of my chest. I had a job to do. I went through the TSA pre-check, expecting another random screening, but I sailed through. Maybe it was the airport's frantic energy, or maybe I'd already paid my tax for the day at the train station. I made it to the gate just as the first-class boarding call was announced. I walked down the jet bridge, the scent of jet fuel and recycled air familiar and grounding. I stepped onto the plane, and for a second, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. This was my world. I've spent more time in the air than on the ground some years. I found my seat, 2A. I stowed my briefcase carefully, smoothing out the leather. I sat down and let the plush leather of the seat cradle me. The flight attendant, a woman with a bright, rehearsed smile, approached me. "Welcome aboard. Sir, can I get you a pre-departure drink? Champagne. Water. Water? Please," I said. "With lemon." I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. I tried to visualize the meeting. I tried to find that CEO mindset again. I told myself that the morning was over. The worst had passed. I was safe now. 0 feet in the air. Surrounded by the elite and the protected, I listened to the sounds of the cabin, the overhead bins clicking shut, the soft murmur of other passengers, the chime of the seatbelt sign. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing our flight time and weather. I felt the slight vibration of the plane as the engine started to hum. We were moving. We were backing away from the gate. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs for the first time since that hand hit my shoulder. I was going to make it. I was going to win. But then, the movement stopped. We weren't on the runway. We were just sitting. I opened my eyes. I saw the flight attendants huddled near the cockpit door, whispering. Their smiles were gone. They were looking down the aisle, their eyes searching the rows. I felt a familiar coldness wash over me. I looked out the window. 2 black SUVs were parked on the tarmac, right next to our engine. Men in dark windbreakers were stepping out. The lead flight attendant, a woman who had just offered me champagne with a smile, began walking toward the first-class cabin. She wasn't looking at the passengers. She was looking at a manifest in her hand. And then, she stopped. She stopped right at row 2. Behind her, the cabin door, which had been sealed for departure, groaned as it was pried back open, and the heavy, Rhythmic thud of boots began to echo against the floorboards of the galley. The cabin air, which had felt like a sanctuary only moments ago, suddenly turned thin and metallic. I didn't have to look up to know that the heavy footsteps weren't those of a late passenger or a flight attendant bringing a fresh tray of warm nuts. These were the boots of men who were paid to carry the weight of the law. And they were walking with a rhythm that had only one destination. My row? I kept my gaze fixed on the small, scratched window, watching the fuel trucks on the tarmac, but in the reflection of the plexiglass, I saw the lead flight attendant point a trembling finger directly at the back of my head. "Sir," a voice boomed, cutting through the hushed murmurs of the first-class cabin like a serrated blade. "We need you to stand up. Now." I turned my head slowly. Standing there were two men in dark windbreakers, with Federal Marshal stenciled in high-visibility yellow across their chests. They weren't just standing. They were looming. Their hands were hovering near their hips. A universal gesture of readiness that sends a very specific message. Do not give us a reason. Behind them, the passengers in the rows behind me were craning their necks, their faces a gallery of suspicion and judgment. I saw an elderly woman in 3B pull her purse closer to her chest. I saw a man in a sharp suit, someone I had likely shared a conference table with at some point, narrow his eyes with a look that said, I knew he didn't belong here. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked. I made sure to keep my hands visible on the armrests. I didn't reach for my ID. I didn't reach for my bag. I just sat there, trying to maintain the dignity of the man I had spent 50 years becoming. While the system tried to strip me back down to a statistic, "We have a report of a stolen high-value item and a security breach at the transit hub," the taller marshal said. His voice was flat, devoid of any human inflection. He looked at my briefcase, the one I had just straightened out, and then back at me. "The description of the suspect and the property matches you exactly. Stand up, put your hands behind your back, and step out into the aisle." I was already cleared, I said, my voice cracking just slightly with a cocktail of rage and exhaustion. I was detained at the train station for 45 minutes. They checked everything. They called my office. They let me go. "We don't have a record of that," the marshal replied. "And we aren't asking." Stand up. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. As I stood up, the sound of the entire cabin's collective breath-catching was louder than the jet engines. I felt the eyes of 200 people burning into my skin. In their minds, the trial was already over. I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't a traveler. I was a security breach. I was the reason their flight was delayed. I was the dark shadow in their brightly lit world. When the first zip tie clicked shut around my wrists, the sound echoed in the small cabin like a gunshot. It was a cold, biting sensation, the plastic digging into my skin, reminding me that no matter how many zeros were in my bank account, my freedom was a fragile thing that could be revoked by a description. They led me out of the plane. The walk of shame through the jet bridge felt like it lasted a lifetime. Every step away from my seat was a step away from the life I had built. I could hear the whispers behind me. I knew something was off when he boarded. Why do they always pick first class? The poison of their assumptions followed me into the terminal, where a small crowd of travelers stood behind a security line, watching me being led away in restraints like a common criminal. We entered a small, windowless interrogation room just past the gate. It was even bleaker than the one at the train station. No windows, just a flickering fluorescent light that made everything look sickly and gray. They pushed me into a hard plastic chair and placed my $5. Zero briefcase on the table between us. Let's talk about the bag, the shorter marshal said. He started putting on latex gloves. The snap of the rubber against his wrist was the only sound in the room. There is nothing to talk about, I said. I wasn't polite anymore. That version of me, the one who thought he could earn his way out of this, had died somewhere between the jet bridge and this room. That bag contains legal contracts for a multi-million-dollar merger. My name is on the digital tag. My DNA is on the handle. And if you open it without a warrant, I will make sure your careers are as short as this conversation. The tall marshal leaned over the table, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee and the arrogance on his breath. You think that suit makes you special? You think a title makes you untouchable? Out there, maybe. In here, you're just another guy who fits the profile of a thief who hit 3 luxury shops at the station this morning. Now, are you going to give me the code? Or am I going to cut this leather open? I felt the glass I'd been swallowing all morning finally shatter in my throat. I looked him dead in the eye, not as a victim, but as the man who runs a company with more employees than his entire department. Call my attorney, I said, my voice a low, dangerous rumble. His name is on the first speed dial of the phone you confiscated. And while you're at it, call the vice president of the airline. He's a personal friend. Tell him you've currently got his 10-million-mile flyer in zip ties over a description that was already cleared 2 hours ago. Go ahead. Make the call. The 2 marshals shared a look. It was the first flicker of doubt I'd seen in them. The younger one picked up my phone, his gloved fingers tapping the screen. He stepped into the corner of the room, whispering. I sat there, the plastic ties biting into my wrists, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, unadulterated fury. I thought about my son. I thought about the talk we were going to have when I got home. If I got home. I thought about the American dream and how it felt more like a recurring nightmare today. 5 minutes passed. 10. The tall marshal stayed by the door, his arms crossed, trying to maintain his posture of authority, but I could see the sweat beads forming on his upper lip. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of my own rhythmic, controlled breathing. I was no longer a man being interrogated. I was a hunter waiting for the trap to spring. The door opened. A man in a suit, not a police uniform, but an expensive, tailored suit, walked in. He was the airport's general manager. Behind him was a woman from the airline's legal department. They weren't looking at the marshals. They were looking at me, and they looked terrified. Mr. Sterling, the manager said, his voice trembling. There has been a catastrophic communication error. He didn't wait for the marshals. He personally cut the zip ties off my wrists. The sudden rush of blood back into my hands felt like fire. I didn't rub my wrists. I didn't thank him. I just stood up, my height filling the small room, the power I had been suppressing all morning finally radiating off me in waves. An error? I asked, my voice cold enough to freeze the air in the room. You pulled me off a plane. You humiliated me in front of 200 people. You put me in restraints after I had already been cleared by the police at the station. This isn't an error. This is a choice. The report from the train station. It was never updated in the federal system. The younger marshal stammered, his face now the color of ash. We were just following the lead. You were following a color, I interrupted. Don't lie to me. You saw the suit and the bag, and you decided the only way a man like me has things like this is if he stole them. The airline representative stepped forward, her hands shaking as she held out my briefcase. Mr. Sterling, we have a private car waiting. We've cleared the runway. We will hold the flight for you. We are deeply, deeply sorry. "The flight is still there?" I asked. "Yes, sir. We haven't moved it. We've told the passengers there was a security paperwork issue." I looked at the two marshals. They wouldn't meet my gaze. They were looking at the floor, their authority having evaporated the moment they realized my bank account was larger than their jurisdiction. I picked up my briefcase. I smoothed out the wrinkled leather where the marshal had gripped it. I felt the weight of it, the weight of the merger, the weight of the lives that depended on me. "I'm going back on that plane," I said, my voice steady and terrifyingly calm. "And you are going to walk me back. Not as a suspect, as a guest. And when we get to that door, you are going to apologize to me in front of every single person who watched you take me off." The manager nodded frantically. "Whatever you need, Mr. Sterling. Whatever you need." We walked back through the terminal. This time, I wasn't being led. I was leading. The marshals walked behind me, their heads down, their presence now serving as a silent admission of their own failure. We walked through the gate, down the jet bridge, and back into the cabin of the plane. The silence that greeted me when I stepped back onto that aircraft was different than the one before. It wasn't the silence of suspicion. It was the silence of shock. The passengers watched as the two federal marshals, the men who had dragged me out in ties, stood in the galley and, in voices loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear, apologized for the unfortunate and mistaken detention. I didn't look at them. I didn't look at the passengers. I walked straight to seat 2A. I sat down. I stowed my bag. I felt the eyes of the man in 3B, the one who had judged me. I turned and looked him right in the eye until he turned away, his face turning a deep, shameful red. The flight attendant approached me again. She was the same woman who had pointed me out earlier. Her hands were trembling so hard, the water in the glass she was carrying was sloshing over the rim. I am so sorry, sir," she whispered. "Just the water," I said. "Thank you." The cabin door groaned shut. The engines began to whine, the vibration traveling through the floor and into the soles of my shoes. We began to push back. I looked out the window at the black SUVs still parked on the tarmac, the marshals standing beside them, looking small and insignificant against the vastness of the runway. I leaned my head back against the headrest. I was free. I was on my way to the merger. I had won. But as the plane lifted off the ground and the city began to shrink beneath us, I looked down at my wrists. The red welts from the zip ties were already starting to fade. But the feeling of that cold plastic, the feeling of being unmasked by a world that refused to see me as anything other than a threat, was settling into my bones. A permanent ache that no amount of success could ever truly dull. The hum of the Boeing 777's engines is a sound I usually find hypnotic. A steady, white noise lullaby that signals I am in my element, moving toward a goal. But today, as we leveled out at 30,000 feet, that hum felt like a taunt. I sat in seat 2A, the leather cool against my back, staring at the tray table where my water sat, the lemon slice bobbing aimlessly. My wrists were throbbing. The red lines from the zip ties were already turning into a dull, bruised purple, a secret map of my morning etched into my skin. I pulled the sleeves of my charcoal jacket down to hide them. I was a CEO again, at least on the surface, but the man underneath was still back in that windowless room, waiting for a code to be entered into a computer that didn't care about his name. I looked at the briefcase resting on the empty seat beside me. It looked different now. It was no longer just a vessel for contracts. It was a witness. It had been pawed through by gloved hands, tossed on metal tables, and treated like a ticking bomb. I reached out and ran my thumb over the leather, feeling the slight crease where the marshal had gripped it too tightly. It was a scar. We both had them now. The flight attendant, the one who had seen me led away in shame, crept toward me. She didn't walk with the usual bounce of a first-class server. She moved like she was walking on eggshells. She placed a small, warm towel on my console without saying a word. I used it to wipe my face, the steam momentarily masking the fact that my hands were still trembling. I wasn't shaking from fear anymore. I was shaking from the sheer, exhausting effort of holding my world together while everyone else was trying to tear it apart. I spent the next 2 hours staring out at the clouds. They looked so peaceful from up here, limitless, white, and indifferent to the borders and biases of the ground. I thought about the meeting waiting for me. This merger was supposed to be the crown jewel of my career. It was the moment I would finally prove to the old guard that I wasn't just a guest in their house, but a co-owner. But as the plane began its descent into the city where the deal would be signed, I realized that the deal had already been done. Not the business deal, but the deal I had made with myself 30 years ago. I had told myself that if I worked harder, dressed better, and spoke clearer, I could transcend the profile. And today, I realized that was a lie. You don't transcend it. You just buy a better seat to watch it happen. When we landed, the transition was jarringly efficient. The airline had a car waiting at the jet bridge, an act of corporate penance that felt both desperate and hollow. I was whisked through a private exit, bypassing the crowds, bypassing the gaze. It was the VIP treatment, but it felt like being smuggled. I didn't want a private exit. I wanted a world where I didn't need one. I arrived at the skyscraper where the merger meeting was being held with 20 minutes to spare. I walked into the lobby, and for a split second, I felt that same tightness in my chest. I looked at the security guard behind the marble desk. He looked up, saw my suit, saw the way I carried myself, and gave me a respectful nod. Floor 52, Mr. Sterling. They're expecting you. I took the elevator up. The silence of the lift was a vacuum. When the doors opened, I was greeted by my legal team and the board of the company we were acquiring. There were handshakes. There were smiles. There was the smell of expensive coffee and the sound of fountain pens clicking. Rough morning with the delays. Sterling, one of the board members asked. A white man in his 60s who had probably never been asked for an ID in his life. I looked at him. I looked at my wrists, hidden safely under my bespoke sleeves. I looked at the wrinkled edges of the contracts I was about to sign. You have no idea, I said, my voice smooth and professional. I didn't tell them the story. Not then. In that room, I was the lion. I was the one with the pen. I was the one with the power. I signed the documents with a steady hand, securing a future for thousands of families, including my own. The room erupted in applause. There were toasts. There were congratulations. But as soon as I could slip away, I went into the executive washroom. I locked the door, leaned over the sink, and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. The CEO was there. But the man I saw in the train station was there too, the one who had to swallow glass just to survive a Tuesday morning. I took out my phone and called my son. He's 15, just starting to grow into his own shoulders, starting to look more like me every day. Hey, Dad, he said, his voice bright and full of the uncomplicated hope of youth. Did you close the deal? I did. Son, I said, trying to keep the thickness out of my voice. The deal is done. Awesome. I knew you would. You're the best. I leaned against the marble wall. Listen, Julian, we need to talk when I get home tonight. I had a long day at the station and the airport. There was a pause. Even at 15, he knows what a long day means when I say it like that. He's already seen the news. He's already seen the videos of other men who look like us. Was it the police again? Dad. Yeah, I whispered. It was, but I'm okay. I'm coming home. I'm sorry. Dad, he said. And the fact that a 15-year-old had to apologize to his father for the world's failings broke me in a way the marshals never could. I hung up the phone and stood there in that expensive bathroom for a long time. I realized then that my success wasn't about the merger. It wasn't about the Patek Philippe or the first-class seat. My success was the fact that I was still standing. My success was the fact that I could still look my son in the eye and tell him that we are more than their fears. I'm telling you this story because I need you to understand that the American dream is a work in progress. And sometimes the progress feels like a crawl through broken glass. Success doesn't erase the target. It just changes the caliber of the weapon they use against you. But we cannot let them win. We cannot let the humiliation turn into hate. And we cannot let the pain turn into silence. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own skin, if you've ever had to perform a role just to stay safe, if you've ever had to rebuild your dignity after someone tried to kick it out from under you, I want you to know that I see you. You are not a description. You are not a profile. You are a human being with a soul that no zip tie can hold. Before I go, I want to ask you something. Look around your life. Where are the invisible lines you're afraid to cross? And who told you they were there? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. Let's break the silence that the gaze tries to impose on us. If this story meant something to you, if it made you feel a little less alone in this chaotic world, hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep telling these truths, one story at a time. I'm sitting back in my office now. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep purple. I look at my hands. The marks are almost gone. The deal is signed. I am safe for today. But tomorrow, the alarm will go off at 4:30 a.m. I will put on my suit. I will pick up my briefcase. And I will walk back out into that world, knowing exactly who I am, even if they refuse to see it. Thank you for listening. Truly, it's the only way we keep our heads above water. Stay safe out there. Be kind to each other. But more importantly, be kind to yourselves. I'll see you in the next one. Good night. I'm sitting in seat 1A, first class. You know the vibe, the extra legroom, the smell of warm nuts and expensive bourbon, the kind of quiet that only money can buy. I've got my noise-canceling headphones around my neck and a glass of sparkling water in my hand. I'm looking out the window at the tarmac, thinking about the board meeting I just left. We closed the deal. 7 figures. My team is going to have the best Christmas of their lives. I'm wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my first car. And my watch, well, let's just say it keeps time better than most people keep their promises. I feel like a king. I feel like I finally made it to the place where the air is thin and the problems are small. But then, the air in the cabin changes. You ever feel that? That sudden shift in pressure right before a storm hits. The lead flight attendant, a woman who had been smiling at me and calling me sir just 5 minutes ago, stops at my row. Her smile is gone. It's been replaced by this stiff, professional mask that looks like it's made of cold marble. Behind her are 2 men. They aren't wearing airline uniforms. They're wearing tactical vests, badges clipped to their belts, and that heavy, rhythmic clack of boots that only comes from people who carry authority and iron on their hips. Federal marshals. The entire cabin goes silent. I mean, dead silent. The guy in 1C, some tech executive who's been typing on his MacBook, freezes. The woman across the aisle drops her magazine. All I can hear is the low hum of the plane's ventilation and the sound of my own heart starting to thud against my ribs like a trapped bird. One of the marshals looks me dead in the eye. He doesn't see the CEO. He doesn't see the suit. He doesn't see the man who just saved 500 jobs this morning. He sees a problem. "Sir," he says, and his voice is like gravel hitting a tin roof. "We need you to step off the aircraft immediately. Leave your bags. Keep your hands where we can see them. Before I go any further, I want to stop and ask you something. Straight up. Have you ever spent 20 years of your life building a kingdom? Have you ever worked until your fingers bled, stayed up until the sun rose, and sacrificed everything to prove you belong in the room, only to realize you're still just a trespasser in the eyes of the law? Have you ever felt the world turn on you in 3 seconds flat? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching this from. I need to know who's out there tonight. I need to know I'm not just shouting into the dark. And if you've ever felt that weight, that invisible shadow that follows us no matter how high we climb, hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot to talk about. I put the glass down on the tray table. My hand is steady. I've trained it to be steady in boardrooms where millions are on the line. But inside, I'm shaking. I can feel the eyes of every passenger in first class burning into me. I can feel their thoughts. What did he do? Is he a criminal? I knew he didn't look like he belonged here. It's a physical weight, like being buried under a mountain of wet sand. I look at the marshal. I want to yell. I want to pull out my ID and my company credentials and shove them in his face. I want to tell him I pay more in taxes than he makes in 4 years. But I know better. I'm a black man in America, and I'm 50 years old. I know that angry is the last thing I can afford to be right now. Angry gets you hurt. Angry gets you a headline that your mother has to read. Is there a problem? Officer, I ask. My voice is calm. It's my negotiation voice. Smooth. Low. Non-threatening. Step off the plane, sir. The other one says, he's younger. Got that buzz cut and a look in his eyes like he's hoping I'll give him a reason to move his hand toward his holster. We aren't going to ask you again. The flight attendant avoids my gaze now. She's looking at the carpet, fidgeting with her hands. The disrespect isn't just in the words they're saying. It's in the way they're treating me like an object. A piece of luggage that needs to be removed because it might be leaking something dangerous. I stand up. It feels like I'm moving through molasses. I move slowly, deliberately. I make sure my hands are open, palms facing them. I don't reach for my phone. I don't reach for my jacket. I just stand there in the aisle of the plane I paid $4,000 to sit on, feeling the eyes of 50 strangers judging me for a crime I don't even know yet. I look back at my briefcase sitting on the seat. It's leather, embossed with my initials. Inside are the contracts that will change the lives of my employees. It looks so small, so pathetic in the face of those badges. I think about my wife, waiting for me at home. I think about the dinner reservation we have for 8 o'clock. I think about how quickly the world can strip you of your dignity, even when you've done everything right. As I start to walk down the aisle toward the door, I pass the man in 1C. He's the one I'd been chatting with during boarding about the stock market. We'd laughed about the Fed's latest move. Now, he won't even look at me. He's pulled his legs back, tucking them under his seat as if I might contaminate him as I pass. That hurt worse than the marshals. That's the velvet cage. You can sit at the table. You can drink the wine. You can talk the talk. But the moment the real world steps in, you're just a man in a cage. And the bars are made of everyone else's fear. The walk to the front of the plane feels like a mile. Every step is a heartbeat. Thud, thud. Thud, thud. I pass the cockpit, where the pilot is looking out the side window, refusing to get involved. I reach the galley, and the cold air from the open jet bridge hits me. It's a sharp, metallic chill that smells like jet fuel and disappointment. I step onto the jet bridge. The transition from the luxury of the cabin to the industrial gray of the tunnel, feeling like a fall from a skyscraper. The two marshals are right behind me, so close I can hear their heavy breathing and the jingle of their handcuffs. I stop just outside the aircraft door, the light from the terminal ahead of us looking dim and hazy. I turn around to look at the lead marshal, my shadow stretching long and thin against the corrugated metal wall of the bridge. I take a deep breath, trying to find the man who runs a multi-million-dollar company, trying to find the man who isn't afraid of anything. But all I find is a cold, hollow space in my chest where my pride used to be. I look at the officer's face, searching for a flicker of humanity, a sign that he sees a person and not a profile. I slowly raise my hands to the level of my shoulders, feeling the fine wool of my suit jacket bunch up around my arms, and I wait for the first touch of cold steel against my wrists. The metal under my feet felt like ice, even through the thick soles of my Italian leather shoes. Standing there on that jet bridge, with my hands up and the world watching, my mind did that thing it always does when things go sideways. It started looking for the exit sign, searching for the moment where the tracks shifted and the train derailed. You see, an hour ago, I was untouchable. Or at least, I let myself believe I was. That's the danger of a good day. It makes you forget the rules of the game you've been playing since you were 6 years old. It makes you think the suit is a suit and not a costume. To understand why I'm standing here with 2 federal agents breathing down my neck, you have to see the morning I had. It started at 6:00 a.m. in a boardroom on the 42nd floor, overlooking the skyline. The sun was hitting the glass buildings, turning the whole city into something that looked like it was made of gold and possibilities. I was at the head of the table. Me, a kid from a neighborhood where the only thing that grew in the cracks of the sidewalk was grit. I was surrounded by men in blue shirts and silk ties, and for 3 hours, I was the smartest person in the room. We were closing a deal that had taken me 18 months to build. It wasn't just about the money, though the money was enough to make a man's head spin. It was about the legacy. It was about proving that my company, built from nothing but late nights and a refusal to fail, could stand toe-to-toe with the giants. When I signed that final page, the sound of the pen on the paper felt like a drumbeat. I shook hands, accepted the congratulations, and felt a surge of pride so thick I could almost taste it. It tasted like expensive coffee and victory. I walked out of that building feeling like I was 10 feet tall, carrying my briefcase like it held the secrets to the universe. I decided to take the train link to the airport. I like the train. It keeps me grounded. It reminds me of where I came from, watching the city blur past the window. I walked into the station, my head held high, the adrenaline still humming in my veins. I was whistling a tune my grandfather used to hum, something low and steady. I felt good. I felt like an American success story. But then I saw them. Near the entrance to the airport shuttle platform, there were 2 officers, local cops, not the marshals. They were leaning against a pillar, hats tilted back, watching the crowd. It's a look every black man knows. It's not a look of protection. It's a look of inventory. They were scanning the crowd, and I saw the exact millisecond the scanner stopped on me. It's a physical sensation, like a cold finger tracing a line down your spine. In that moment, the CEO vanished. The 42nd floor, the 7-figure deal, the respect of my peers, it all evaporated. I could feel the invisible weight dropping onto my shoulders. This is what we call the double consciousness. Friend, it's the exhausting mental gymnastics of seeing yourself through the eyes of people who are looking for a reason to hate you. I didn't even realize I was doing it at first. But the mask went on. It's a reflex. I adjusted my posture. I didn't slow down. Because slowing down looks like you're hiding. I didn't speed up. Because speeding up looks like you're running. I kept my pace rhythmic. I made sure my hands were out of my pockets, clearly visible as I gripped the handle of my briefcase. I even adjusted my face, softened my features, wiped away the intimidating look of a man who just dominated a boardroom, and replaced it with a look of harmless, neutral boredom. I was about 20 feet away when I saw one of them nudge the other. He didn't use words, he just jerked his chin in my direction. The other one straightened up, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt, resting near his holster, not drawing, just reminding me it was there. I kept walking. Don't look at them. Don't look away too fast. Just keep moving. Hey! You. Sir, hold up a second. The voice echoed off the tile walls of the station. I stopped. I didn't turn around fast. I did it slowly, like I was surprised, but not startled. I gave them my best distinguished professional smile. The one I use for charity galas. Yes, officers. Can I help you? They walked over, their boots making that hollow clack-clack sound. They didn't smile back. They did that thing where they stand too close, invading your personal space to see if you'll flinch. The older one, a guy with a face like a bulldog, looked at my suit, then at my briefcase, then back at my face. Where are you headed in such a hurry? He asked. His tone was casual, but his eyes were like two pieces of flint. I'm catching a flight, I said, keeping my voice smooth. Is there something wrong? We've had some reports of suspicious activity in the terminal area, the younger one said. He was looking at my briefcase like he expected it to start ticking. Mind telling us what's in the bag? I felt a flash of heat in my chest. What's in the bag? My life's work is in the bag. The future of 500 families is in the bag. But I didn't say that. I just held it up slightly. Business documents. Officer, I just came from a meeting downtown. A meeting? Huh, Bulldog said, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Must have been a pretty important meeting to be dressed like that. You got some ID on you. I reached for my back pocket, but then I froze. I realized that if I moved too quickly, if my hand disappeared behind my coat, this whole situation could turn into a tragedy in the blink of an eye. I looked him in the eye and said, I'm going to reach for my wallet now. It's in my right rear pocket. Is that okay? He just nodded, his hand still resting on his belt. I pulled out my wallet and handed him my driver's license. He took it. Didn't even look at it at first. Just held it between two fingers, like it was something dirty. He looked at my name, then looked at me. He whispered something into his shoulder radio. I stood there, the people in the station blurring around us. I saw a group of tourists walk by, their eyes wide, whispering to each other. I saw a businessman in a suit almost identical to mine walk past without even getting a second glance. He was white. He was invisible. I was center stage in a play I never auditioned for. Wait here, Bulldog said. They stepped a few feet away, talking in low voices. I stood there on the platform, the smell of damp concrete and ozone from the tracks filling my lungs. I felt small. I felt like a child being scolded in the hallway. I looked down at my shoes, those expensive, beautiful shoes, and I hated them. I hated the suit. I hated that I had spent my whole life thinking that if I just worked hard enough, if I just climbed high enough, I could outrun this shadow. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I was carrying a contract worth millions, a document that proved I was a pillar of the community, an employer, a taxpayer, a leader, and yet, to these two men, I was just a description. I was just a set of variables that added up to a threat. After what felt like an eternity, they walked back over. Bulldog handed me my license. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge the inconvenience. "You're free to go," he said. "But stay alert. There's a lot of people who don't belong around here today." I didn't ask what he meant by people who don't belong. I knew. I took my license, put it back in my wallet, and walked toward the airport link. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to turn around and scream at them. I wanted to demand the respect I had earned. But the mask wouldn't let me. The mask told me to be quiet. The mask told me to get on the train and be grateful I wasn't in handcuffs. I sat on the train, my briefcase gripped tightly in my lap. I looked at the reflection in the window. I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. He looked tired. He looked old. The fire that had been burning in me since the boardroom had been replaced by a cold, gray ash. I tried to tell myself it was just a fluke, a random stop. I tried to shake it off as I walked through the airport terminal. I cleared security. Another 15 minutes of being patted down, having my shoes scanned twice, and watching a TSA agent flip through my private contracts with a bored, suspicious expression. I didn't say a word. I just nodded and followed the rules. By the time I reached the gate for my flight, I was exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion you get from work, but a soul-deep weariness. I just wanted to get home. I wanted to sit in my living room, listen to some jazz, and forget that the world existed. I saw my name on the board. First class. Seat 1A. I thought, okay, almost there. Once I'm on that plane, I'm safe. They don't mess with you in first class. I boarded the plane. I felt the relief wash over me as the flight attendant took my coat. I sat down in that wide, plush seat. I felt the familiar hum of the aircraft beneath me, a vibration that usually soothes me. I took a deep breath, trying to reclaim the version of myself that had walked out of the boardroom 4 hours ago. I tried to remember the taste of the victory. I watched the other passengers board. I saw the tech exec in 1C. I saw the families in coach. I felt the plane start to push back from the gate. The slow, heavy movement of the tug. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back, thinking about the dinner reservation with my wife. I could almost smell the red wine. I could almost feel the warmth of our home. Then, the plane stopped. It wasn't a smooth stop. It was a jolt. A sudden, jarring halt that made the overhead bins creak. I opened my eyes. We were sitting on the taxiway, halfway between the gate and the runway. The engines were still whining, but we weren't moving. I looked around. The flight attendants were whispering in the galley. The captain's voice came over the intercom, sounding strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a minor technical issue we need to address before departure. We should be moving shortly. Please remain in your seats." A technical issue. I felt that prickle on my neck again. That heat. I looked toward the front of the plane, toward the thick, reinforced door of the cockpit. Through the small window in the galley, I saw a flash of blue, then white, then the glint of metal. I saw the jet bridge, the one we had just disconnected from, slowly crawling back toward the aircraft like a long, gray finger. It docked with a heavy thud that vibrated through the floorboards. I sat there, frozen. I didn't move a muscle. I just watched the cabin door. I watched as the handle turned. I watched as the seal broke, and the air from the outside rushed in. carrying that same smell of jet fuel and disappointment I had encountered at the train station. And then I saw the boots, not the polished shoes of a pilot, not the sensible flats of a flight attendant. Heavy, black, tactical boots. They stepped onto the blue carpet of the first-class cabin, and the world seemed to shrink until there was nothing left but the sound of my own breathing. I gripped the armrests of my seat so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't look up. I didn't have to. I knew exactly who they were coming for. I could feel the collective gaze of the entire plane shifting toward 1A, a heavy, silent judgment that felt like a physical blow. The silence was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air right out of my lungs. I felt a shadow fall over me, blocking out the dim light of the cabin. A hand, large, calloused, and unyielding, reached down and tapped the edge of my tray table, the sound of a wedding ring clinking against the plastic echoing like a gunshot in the quiet space. I looked up, and the first thing I saw wasn't a face, but the silver badge pinned to a black vest, reflecting my own distorted, terrified expression back at me. "Sir," the voice said, and it was the same voice from the train station, only colder, sharper, more final. "You need to come with us." I didn't ask why. I didn't ask where. I just felt my soul retreat to some small, hidden corner of my body, leaving behind a hollow shell that moved because it was told to move. I unbuckled my seatbelt, the click sounding like the snapping of a bone, and I stood up into the suffocating weight of the air. My legs felt like they were made of heavy, wet sand as I shuffled out of the seat. Every movement was mechanical, a series of commands my brain was sending to a body that didn't want to obey anymore. I didn't look at the marshals. I didn't look at the flight attendant. I kept my eyes fixed on the small, silver rivets on the cabin wall, trying to find something, anything, to anchor myself to so I wouldn't just float away into a cloud of pure, unfiltered shame. The walk down the aisle was different this time. When I boarded, I walked with the stride of a man who owned the ground he stepped on. Now, I was a ghost haunting my own life. I could feel the heat of the passengers' stares. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a verdict. They had already found me guilty, in their minds. The suit was a lie, the briefcase was a prop, and I was finally being revealed for what they suspected all along. I saw a woman in row 4 clutch her purse tighter to her chest as I passed. I saw a man shake his head. That "here we go again" look etched into his face. The air in the galley was stagnant, smelling of recycled oxygen and the sharp, chemical tang of cleaning supplies. The lead marshal didn't lead me all the way off the plane yet. He stopped me right there, in that cramped space between the cockpit door and the first-class curtain. He wanted a show. He wanted a public deconstruction. "The bag," he said, pointing a gloved finger at the briefcase I was white-knuckling. "Set it on the counter. Open it." My heart gave a violent kick against my ribs. "Officer, these are confidential legal documents. I am the CEO of— I don't care if you're the King of England," he snapped, his voice rising just enough to carry back into the cabin so everyone could hear. "Open the bag, or we'll open it for you. And I promise you won't like the way we do it." I looked at the younger marshal. He had his arms crossed, his feet planted wide, his eyes roaming over me with a clinical coldness, like he was looking for a seam to rip open. I realized then that my identity, the decades of school, the 100-hour work weeks, the board seats, the community awards meant absolutely nothing. To them, I wasn't an executive. I wasn't a father. I wasn't a man. I was just a subject in a high-risk environment. With trembling fingers, I reached for the latches. Click. Click. The sound was deafening. I opened the briefcase. There they were. The blueprints for the new community center in North Philly. The signed contracts for the merger. The photographs of my team at the groundbreaking ceremony. These were the artifacts of a life built on integrity and sweat. The marshal didn't gently look through them. He reached in with a rough hand and began tossing papers onto the galley counter. A 3-year financial projection slid off the edge and fluttered onto the floor, landing near his muddy boot. My blueprints, the ones I had spent nights obsessing over with the architects, were folded back and creased by his grip. "What is this?" he asked, holding up a specialized encrypted hard drive I use for secure data. "It's an external drive for work," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I hated that crack. I hated that he could hear the vibration of my fear. "Looks like a trigger to me," the younger one muttered, stepping closer. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A hand holding a smartphone, peeking through the gap in the first-class curtain. Someone was recording. They weren't recording a security incident. They were recording my humiliation. They were capturing the moment a black man in a $3,000 suit was brought to his knees by 2 men who didn't even know his name. That video would be on the internet before we even hit the ground. No context. No SKYTRUTHSTORIES. Just a headline that said, "Suspicious man removed from flight." The rage started as a tiny spark in the pit of my stomach. It was a cold, blue flame. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the 500 people who rely on me for their mortgage payments. I wanted to tell them that I had been invited to the White House twice. I wanted to demand the basic human dignity that should be a right, not a privilege reserved for people who don't look like me. But the double consciousness whispered in my ear, "Stay still. Stay quiet. If you move, they win. If you yell, you're the aggressive black man. If you cry, you're weak. Just be a statue. Be a stone. Is there a problem, agents?" The voice came from the cockpit. The captain had stepped out. He was an older white man with graying temples and 4 gold stripes on his sleeve. For a split second, I felt a surge of hope. Surely, the captain would see the absurdity of this. Surely, he would recognize another professional. The marshals didn't even turn around. "We're conducting an investigation. Captain, step back." The captain looked at me, not with solidarity, but with a weary, annoyed impatience. He wasn't worried about justice. He was worried about his departure window. "Make it fast," he said to the marshals. "I've got a slot to hit. And we're already 10 minutes behind because of this." He went back into the cockpit and closed the door. Thud. That sound, that door closing, was the final nail. The system had decided I was an inconvenience. A smudge on a clean window that needed to be wiped away so the world could keep spinning. The marshal finished tossing my life around. He found nothing. Of course. No suspicious package. No threat. Just the paperwork of a man who was trying to change his corner of the world. He looked disappointed. He looked like a hunter who had tracked a prize buck, only to find out it was a shadow. "Pick it up," he said, gesturing to the scattered papers on the floor. "I beg your pardon," I said. My voice was no longer a negotiation. It was flat. It was the voice of a man who had reached the end of his rope and found a knot. I said, "Pick it up. We're moving to the terminal for further questioning." I looked down at the floor. My blueprints were sitting in a puddle of melted ice from a discarded drink. The ink was starting to run. The faces of my employees in the photos were being trampled by the marshal's shadows. I knelt down, not because I was submissive, but because I had to protect what was mine. I gathered the wet, crumpled papers with hands that felt numb. I tucked the hard drive back into its slot. I closed the briefcase. The weight of it, now feeling like it was filled with lead instead of paper. As I stood back up, I caught my reflection in the chrome of the galley oven. I looked at the man in the charcoal suit. His tie was crooked. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a stranger. He looked like a victim. "Let's go," the younger marshal said, grabbing my upper arm. His grip was tight, the kind of grip that leaves a bruise you can't see but can always feel. They led me out of the galley and onto the jet bridge. The transition from the artificial warmth of the cabin to the echoing, industrial cold of the tunnel was like being doused in freezing water. The sound of the jet engines outside was a dull, rhythmic roar, a sound that usually meant progress, but now felt like a funeral dirge. I walked toward the terminal, the marshals flanking me like I was a high-value prisoner. I could feel the eyes of the gate agents through the glass windows ahead. I could feel the weight of the stain settling into my skin, a mark that no amount of success or money could ever truly scrub off. We reached the end of the bridge, where the heavy security doors led back into the main terminal. The marshal pulled out his key card, but before he swiped it, he stopped. He turned me around to face him, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You think you're special because of that watch and that suit, don't you?" he whispered. His eyes narrowed into slits. "But out here, in the real world, you're exactly what I say you are. Don't forget that." The air in the tunnel seemed to vanish. I stood there, trapped between the plane I was forced to leave and the terminal that didn't want me, feeling the raw, jagged edge of a reality that no boardroom could ever prepare me for. My fingers curled around the handle of my briefcase, the leather biting into my palm, as the heavy steel door in front of us began to slide open with a slow, grinding shriek. The sliding steel door groaned as it retracted into the wall, revealing a sterile, windowless hallway that smelled like industrial-grade floor wax and stale air. I stepped through, the marshal's boots echoing behind me with a rhythmic, military precision that seemed to mock the irregular thudding of my heart. We weren't headed toward a jail cell, but something that felt just as suffocating. A small, fluorescent-lit security office tucked into the bowels of the terminal. It was a place where time seemed to stop. A gray purgatory where your rights felt like they were up for debate. They pointed to a hard, plastic chair bolted to the floor. I sat. I didn't have a choice. I placed my briefcase on my lap, my hand still gripping the handle so tightly my fingers had gone numb. I looked at the walls, bare, except for a dusty say something poster and a clock that ticked with a loud, mechanical clack every second. The lead marshal, the one who had humiliated me in front of 50 people, held out his hand. "Phone. Unlock it." I looked up at him. I thought about the Fourth Amendment. I thought about the privacy of my clients and the sensitive data on that device. But then I looked at his eyes, cold, impatient, and looking for any reason to escalate. I unlocked the phone and handed it over. I felt naked. Every text to my wife, every private business email, every photo of my kids was now being scrolled through by a man who had already decided I was a threat. He stepped away, whispering into his radio, while the younger one leaned against the doorframe, watching me like a hawk. For 20 minutes, no one said a word. The only sound was the ticking clock. Clack, clack, clack. Every second felt like a drop of water in a slow torture. I looked down at my suit. It was wrinkled now. The crisp, powerful silhouette I'd walked into the boardroom with this morning was gone. I felt small. I felt like I was back in high school, being pulled over in my dad's old beat-up sedan, wondering if I'd make it home for dinner. Finally, the lead marshal walked back in. He didn't look at me. He was looking at his own notes. He'd made a call. He'd called my office. I could only imagine my vice president's voice on the other end. The confusion, the shock of hearing that his CEO was being held by federal marshals at an airport. "We've verified your story," the marshal said. His voice wasn't apologetic. It wasn't even kind. It was just flat. The report of the suspicious package was misidentified. "You're good to go, sir." He handed my phone back. I took it. But I didn't move. I waited for the rest of it. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience. That we made a mistake. The thank you for your cooperation." It never came. He just checked his watch and gestured toward the door. "You might still make your flight if you hurry. They're holding it for another 5 minutes while we clear the tarmac." I stood up. My legs were shaky, like I'd just stepped off a boat after a long voyage. I walked toward the door, my briefcase feeling like it was filled with lead. As I passed him, I stopped. I didn't look at him with anger. I didn't have the energy for that anymore. I looked at him with a profound, bone-deep sadness. "I did everything right today," I said softly. My voice was steady, but it carried the weight of 50 years of living in this skin. I worked hard. I followed the law. I dressed the part. And it didn't matter. Not for 1 second. He didn't say a word. He just stared through me, as if I were made of glass. I walked out of that office and back through the terminal. It was a long walk. People were moving all around me. Vacationers with their rolling suitcases. Business travelers on their phones. Kids eating pizza. None of them knew. To them, I was just another man in a suit. But I felt like I was glowing with a neon sign that said, "Suspect." I felt like everyone could see the invisible grime that those marshals had rubbed off on me. I reached the gate. The flight attendant who had watched me be hauled off was standing there, her hand on the boarding pass scanner. When she saw me, her eyes widened. She didn't smile. She didn't apologize. She just nodded and opened the door. "Welcome back, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I walked down the jet bridge, the same one where I'd stood with my hands up just an hour ago. I stepped back onto the plane. The silence that hit me when I entered the cabin was even worse than the silence when I'd left. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of awkwardness. I walked past the woman in row 4 who had clutched her purse. I walked past the man in 1C. I sat down in 1A. The plane started to move almost immediately. The engines roared. The floor vibrated, and we lifted off into the darkening sky. I looked out the window as the city lights began to twinkle below, looking like a carpet of diamonds. It was beautiful, but for the first time in my life, the view didn't inspire me. It just reminded me of how far I was from the ground, and how easily I could be pushed off. The flight attendant came by with the drink cart. She didn't ask me what I wanted. She just set a glass of water on my tray and moved on as fast as she could. I didn't touch it. I just stared at the ice cubes melting, wondering how many of the people on this plane would go home and tell a story about the guy who almost got arrested. They wouldn't know I was a CEO. They wouldn't know about the 500 jobs I saved this morning. They would just remember the image of a black man being led away in handcuffs. That's the stain. It's the thing that success can't wash off. It's the realization that, in this country, you can build a skyscraper, but you're still just one suspicious report away from being a criminal in the eyes of your neighbors. I spent the 5-hour flight in total silence. No music, no movies, just me and the hum of the jet. I thought about my father, who worked 3 jobs just to keep me in a good school. I thought about my grandfather, who never even got the chance to sit in a boardroom. I realized that the fight isn't just about getting into the room. It's about staying in it without losing your soul. When we finally landed, I walked off that plane and headed toward the exit. I saw my wife waiting for me at the bottom of the escalator. She was wearing that yellow dress I love, smiling, waving her hand. She didn't know yet. She thought I was just coming home from another successful trip. I reached her and held her. I held her longer than usual. I buried my face in her shoulder and just breathed. "How was the trip?" she asked, pulling back to look at me. "Did you close the deal?" I looked at her, and for a second, I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to tell her about the marshals, the cold floor of the security office, and the way the man in 1C had looked at me. But then I looked at the joy in her eyes, and I realized I couldn't. Not yet. I had to protect her from that coldness for just a little longer. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick. I closed the deal. We walked toward the parking garage, and I felt the weight of the suit again. It wasn't a shield. It was a uniform for a war that never ends. But listen to me, family. If you're watching this, if you've ever felt that weight, if you've ever been the only one in the room who has to be perfect, just to be considered adequate, I want you to know something. Don't you dare let them make you feel small. Don't you dare let them take your pride. They can take your time. They can take your seat on a plane. And they can even take your dignity for an hour in a windowless room. But they cannot take the kingdom you built with your own 2 hands. We don't have the luxury of breaking down. We don't have the luxury of giving up. We straighten our ties. We pick up our briefcases. And we show up the next day twice as strong and 3 times as smart. Because that's the only way we win. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where the world tried to tell you who you were, but you knew better? Have you ever had to walk back into a room where people had already judged you? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. We're a family here, and your stories are what keep me going. If this resonated with you, if you're tired of the stain and ready for the light, hit that subscribe button and join the tribe. I'm reading every single comment tonight. I need to hear your voices. Stay strong, stay proud, and never, ever let them dim your light. I'll see you in the next one.